الآن يسرني أن أدعو الأستاذ كريس بينت الرئيس التنفيذي للتعلم في اتحاد تدريب سلسلة الكتل لإلقاء محاضرة بعنوان سلسلة الكتل في الأعمال Blockchain في الأعمال. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to invite Mr. Chris Bennett, Chief Learning Officer at Blockchain Training Alliance, to deliver his presentation.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Marhaban, Rihad. Thank you so much for having me out here. This is absolutely an honor. My name is Chris Bennett. I'm the Chief Learning Officer with an organization called Blockchain Training Alliance. As you might have guessed, we're all about education and certification in blockchain. You may not know it, but there's something really, really exciting happening right now. We've seen it happen a couple times before, and this is what got me hooked on blockchain. The world is changing, and it's changing in a very, very significant way. When I realized what blockchain was all about, one of the reasons I got so passionate about it is because I said, you know, I've seen this kind of change before. The last time it happened, we called it .com. And the time it happened before that, we called it the PC revolution. And if you think about any of these big transformative changes, it's hard to think about anything in our day-to-day life today that has not been affected by the internet, the .com revolution, or the PC revolution. I mean, we all walk around every day with a supercomputer in our pockets. That's absolutely amazing. So I come from a 25-year background in custom solutions design and consulting. And like I said, when I realized what blockchain was all about, I got very excited. And I said, there's going to need to be an army of people out there trained on these skills who know what blockchain is about, not just the technical skills, but also the business leadership skills to understand how to leverage this technology. And so I'm here today to talk to you about blockchain for business, because we hear so much about Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, and all that's very exciting, but unfortunately we don't hear a lot about blockchain for business and for enterprise, and I think this is where some of the truly transformative power lies. Now, Ahmed did me a great favor in his presentation, because I always start out asking, who's heard of Bitcoin, who's heard of blockchain, and some hands go up. So I won't bother taking that survey again, but let me ask you one question. I think everyone or most of us in the room have heard of blockchain. Show of hands, how many people feel like they could go home and explain it to someone non-technical? Tell them what it's all about. A few. Well, let me tell you a quick little story. When you get into blockchain, you'll very quickly bump up against this term DLT, or distributed or decentralized ledger technology. And the great thing about blockchain is it's just like fashion, right? If you wait long enough, everything that's old is new again. So blockchain is not the first decentralized ledger we've had. We can actually go back in time 3,000 years to a tiny little island, Yap Island, in what is modern-day Micronesia. And we can talk about the Yapese. Now, the Yapese had currency, just like we do. They had coins, and they spent these coins. They exchanged them back and forth with each other. They worked just like the coins we use today, except there was one small difference. These coins were kind of big. It wasn't exactly convenient to fill your pocket with these and go down to the market and buy groceries for the week. So this left the Yapese with a really interesting problem. How do we have trade and commerce? How do we exchange with each other if we can't physically exchange our money? And the idea they came up with was very simple, but very ingenious. They decided everybody's going to keep a mental ledger. What the Yapese did is they took these big gray stones, their coins, and they put each one in a strategic or memorable place around the island. So we might have one on the beach, and one by the forest, and one in the middle of the village, and everybody just knew who owned which coin. And went backwards. Let's say that Ahmed and I want to trade. I own the coin by the pond, and he's got some livestock I want to buy. So the two of us would just come up here in front of all you, in front of the rest of the village or the island, and we would announce our transaction. I am giving Ahmed ownership of my coin or my stone over by the pond, and he is giving me ownership of all of his livestock. all of you would listen to this and you would just know in your head, mentally, that coin over there by the pond, that belongs to Ahmed now. And it's his, and he can do anything he wants with it until he trades it to someone else. So very, very simple but ingenious way of solving this problem. And this prevented them from having to physically exchange their money. Of course, we see the same example here with Alice and Bob. Now, this is a little bit different than how we'd most likely solve this problem today. If we were faced with the same problem today, chances are, instead of all of us keeping this mental record of who owns what, we would just pick one person. I might volunteer to keep the ledger, to keep the record of ownership, who owns which coins. And if I did that, you might call me a bank or a banker. And this has some advantages and some disadvantages. The first advantage is it's a lot more efficient, right? If I'm the only one who has to keep a record of who owns what, that means the rest of you are free to go do whatever you want. You can do other more economically productive things or just more interesting or fun things. Only I have to worry about keeping that record up to date. So that's a huge advantage. There are some disadvantages, though. If I'm going to be the banker, you have to make really, really sure that you can trust me. If I can be bribed or corrupted, if I'm dishonest, well, then I'm not going to be a very good banker. Some of you could lose wealth unfairly. So let's assume that I'm trustworthy, no problem there. I can't be bribed, I can't be corrupted. Well, now we're left with another problem. I need to protect that ledger, all right? If I decide to take the evening off and go down to the beach and do a little fishing, and I've left that ledger over there unprotected, well, anybody else can come change the data in it. They could unfairly steal wealth from someone else. All right, so let's say that I'm trustworthy, I protect the ledger, I keep it under lock and key. Well, we're still left with a couple more problems, and these get increasingly more difficult to solve. The third problem we have to solve is that I'm a human being. Eventually, I'm going to want to go to sleep. I'm going to want to take a day off. I'm going to get sick. I'm not going to be able to keep the ledger, right? We have all felt this. I'm sure all of us have wanted to conduct a transaction, but we can't that day because the bank is closed. So we have to wait until the bank is open to complete that transaction. So if I'm not online, we can't transact. That's problem number 3. Now we get to problem number 4, and this one is really impossible to solve. Problem number 4 has to do with the fact that I'm still a human being, and guess what? As a human being, I'm going to make human mistakes. I'm going to make honest mistakes where I'm not trying to cheat anybody, not trying to transfer wealth unfairly. I just make a mistake. Well, if you think about what the Yappies did, where everybody kept this data collectively, none of this matters, right? It's a lot more inefficient, but if I'm not trustworthy, so what? There's one copy of the ledger, my copy, that tells a different story than what the rest of you tell. That means when we have a vote on what the truth is, I'm going to get outvoted significantly. If I don't protect the ledger and someone changes some of the data on the ledger, the records that I keep, and all of us are keeping the same data, so what? It's no big problem. All of you still have the same data. In fact, the only way that attacker could change the data would be to change 51% or more of it. If I'm offline, I'm unavailable, so what? No problem. And if I make an honest mistake, so what? No problem. So blockchain is the story of us embracing a very inefficient approach to get some very unique benefits. Now, all of this has created a lot of buzz in finance, accounting, banking, economic circles because in many ways, this decentralized ledger replicates a lot of the same features we expect from a bank, right? If I have a ledger and I have assets on the ledger, I can loan money against the value of those assets, right? That's the primary business of a bank, loaning money. I can do that on a decentralized ledger. I can decouple possession and ownership. I don't have to possess something in order to own it. We're used to this idea today, but this is a very, very new idea in economics, right? I could take this cash to the bank and give it to a banker, and walk out, and I don't physically possess the cash anymore, but I still retain ownership of the value it represents. And finally, this decentralized ledger can work as a trust broker when two parties wish to transact, but they don't know each other well enough or have enough trust between them directly. I'll give you a great example. I flew in last night, and in order to visit you, I had to have one of these. If you wanted to come to the States and visit me, you'd need a passport as well. That's because the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia does not know or trust me well enough to let me off the plane, and I say, I vouch for myself, I am Christopher Bennett, right? But the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has enough trust in the government of the United States that if the government of the United States issues me an identity document, that's good enough. Think about selling a used car or an appliance. Someone may come look at it and say, hey, this looks great. Can I write you a check, a personal check? Some of us might get nervous, and we would say, oh, you seem like a nice person, but could you give me a cashier's check? Could you give me a banker's check? I don't know you well enough personally to know whether you'll honor that check. But I know if you write me a check from a bank, I can trust the bank. So we involve these third-party intermediaries, these trust brokers in our transactions. So yeah, a lot of attention right now is in these banking, economic finance circles, and that naturally leads to a discussion around Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, but we're very early in this blockchain journey. If I put you in a time machine and we went back 25 years to 1994, and someone asked us, hey, I keep hearing about the internet. What is the internet all about? Well, in 1994, the best way I could explain the internet to you would be to show you email. Because in 1994, email was really the first consumer-grade application built on this new technological platform and deployed at scale. Just like in the blockchain world, Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, well, they're really just the very first consumer-grade application that we've built on this new platform and deployed at scale. 25 years later, we look back at email and we say, you know what? I can't imagine ever living without email. It's a critical part of my day-to-day life. I don't know how we ever lived without it. And if I look at all the things we've done with the internet since then, email is probably the most boring. Same thing with blockchain, all right? Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies are going to be an indispensable part of our daily lives. But when we look back on the grand narrative of blockchain, probably going to be one of the least interesting use cases. The really exciting stuff is yet to come. Now, if you really want to understand the power of blockchain, this is what I call the onion model of transactions. We can start with the type of transactions on the blockchain that make the most sense to us. And this is two or more parties using the blockchain to record some kind of exchange of monetary value. I owed Ahmed a debt, and so I paid him 2 Bitcoin to settle my debt. We are using the blockchain in that case to record the fact that I transferred some value. Now, if that idea makes sense, we can peel away that outer layer and we can say, you know what? We still have 2 or more parties transacting, but our transaction has nothing to do with an exchange of monetary value. There are a lot of people right now in the medical space who are talking about, hey, wouldn't it be great if we could use blockchain to keep our medical records on? Imagine I'm here in Riyadh and I fall ill and I have to go to the hospital. Wouldn't it be great if the doctor who treated me had access to my full medical history? If that doctor could see any allergies I have, any prescriptions I'm on, any pre-existing conditions I have. Now, there are a lot of privacy and regulatory concerns around that. But let's say that we live in a world of blockchain medical records, and I go to my doctor, and my doctor looks me over and he says, Chris, you look good. There's just one small thing. Your blood pressure was a little high, and so we want to put you on this new prescription to help manage that. Well, in a world of blockchain medical records, that would be something we'd want to add. It's important that this is still 2 or more parties. I shouldn't be allowed to update my medical record without a doctor involved, and I don't want my doctor going and updating my medical record without me knowing or consenting to it. But if we both agree this is a good transaction, well, there's blockchain for it. So now we have two or more parties coming together, but nobody's exchanging anything of monetary value. Okay, if that makes sense, we can peel away the last layer. Now we get to the power of blockchain, and that is a single party using this technology to document the occurrence of a significant event. Let's take supply chain, right? Ahmed gave us the example of the pens. Hey, I got 2 pens here. How do I know which one is the genuine one? How do I know which one is counterfeit and which one is real? Well, maybe there's a fictional app on my phone. And when I'm shopping for pens, I can scan a little barcode or QR code, and on my phone, I can see the entire life cycle of that pen. What factory was it made in? When was it shipped? What distributor picked it up from the factory? How did it get from the distributor to my local store? How long has it been sitting on that store shelf before I bought it this moment? Well, if you think about something like that, each one of those data points is just a single party using the blockchain to record the fact that this interesting event happened. Hey, I manufactured a pen. Hey, I picked up a pen and delivered it to the distribution center, right? Just one single party. Now, you layer on top of that this idea of smart contracts, that you can write your own code, your own logic to respond to these events. And all of a sudden, blockchain becomes more than just digital currencies. It becomes a workflow or a process automation platform. And this is where we start to get into the real power of blockchain for business. Now, I don't want to go through this in a lot of detail. I just want to give you a sense of the timeline. There are 2 big platforms in blockchain right now. Well, 3 if you count Bitcoin. But when we talk about the blockchain 2.0 platforms, the platforms you can build an application on top of, right? We have Ethereum, and I'm sure a lot of you have heard that name. We also have Hyperledger. Ethereum is an open source project which went live in the middle of July 2015. Hyperledger, although many people believe it, is not an IBM product. It is also an open source offering, and this is designed to be blockchain for business. IBM just happens to be a very vocal backer of this project because they want to sell you consulting and hosting services around Hyperledger. Hyperledger goes live December 2015. So if you think about this, we are less than 4 years in. We're 3.5 years into this journey of blockchain not just being a place to keep and manage data, but actually being a platform we can build solutions on top of. Now, a lot of times when I talk about blockchain, people go, oh, I'm too late. I'm too late. I missed the boat. I should have gotten involved in blockchain when I could have gotten 100 Bitcoin for $1. And now I would be wealthy, I'd be a billionaire, and I could be retired living in a resort somewhere. And I always counter that by showing this image. Anyone know what this is? This is the entire internet in 1977. We're 10 years into our blockchain journey. Bitcoin went live 10 years ago. If you didn't find out what the internet was, if you never even heard of the internet until 10 years after this, until 1987, were you too early or were you too late? You were probably 10 to 15 years too early, still. We're really, really at the beginning of this blockchain journey. So when you start to get into blockchain, you'll hear a lot about public versus private blockchains. What often gets left out of the discussion is open versus closed. And really what people mean most of the time when they talk about public versus private isn't public versus private. They mean something permissioned versus something permissionless. It's important when you're thinking about a blockchain solution or how this technology might fit in your enterprise that you think about these metrics. Blockchain is often described as a globally shared database. And that's an okay analogy, except there's one key difference. In the database world, we have 4 primary operations. We call them the CRUD functions. In a traditional database, I can create a new record. I can read an existing record, I can update an existing record, and I can delete a record. In blockchain, we intentionally remove the last two options. I can create a record, and I can read a record. There is no update, there is no delete. That's what makes the immutable part of the immutable ledger of blockchain. So when we talk about a blockchain solution, we really want to talk about it on two metrics. Is it public or private? Who can write or add data to the solution? Is it open or closed? Who can consume that data? Like I said, really when people talk about public versus private, what they tend to mean is permissioned versus permissionless. And what this really comes down to is identity. If I don't know who you are, if I don't know your identity, then it is impossible for me to have any kind of permissions or role-based access. Identity is a prerequisite to permissions. So that means platforms like Bitcoin and Ethereum, these permissionless platforms, only have one choice. That is, well, they have two choices. One's just not very good. They have two choices. They can say, all right, we either show all the data to everybody all the time, or we don't show any of the data to anybody ever. And like I said, the second one isn't really that good of an option. And you can see this if you look at a blockchain transaction. This is a screen grab from a site called Etherscan, an Ethereum blockchain explorer, but you could get this exact same information for Bitcoin or any other kind of public blockchain. You can see we got a timestamp. We can see who sent money to whom. So that from address there sent some money to that to address. How much did they send? A little over 15,000 US dollars, or a little under 75 Ether. And any of you can go on to Etherscan right now. You could pull up your phone and you could view this exact same data. Why does this work? Why can we make this data public? Because look at the from and the to. Do you know who that is? I don't. Think about calling up your local bank and saying, good morning, how are you doing? I was just wondering, do you mind if I log in and view all the transactions that all your customers are conducting with each other this morning? Chances are they would hang up the phone on you before you even finish that question. There's no way they would share this kind of data with you. But we can make this kind of data public on a platform like Ethereum or Bitcoin because of the anonymity, because I don't know who those identities are. I don't know if this is a large transfer of money or not. I don't know, is this one individual repaying a debt to another individual? That might be a lot of money. Is this General Motors buying a new order of tires from Firestone? This may not be much money at all. So when we talk about these two platforms, and these are just discussion points, these are not absolutes, but we look at some of the use cases we see around these platforms. When we talk about platforms like Ethereum, we generally tend to see consumer-facing applications. When we look at platforms like Hyperledger, we really see enterprise solutions, B2B or business-to-business solutions, solutions which are generally not focused on the end consumer. And so I won't, in the interest of time, go through all of this, but you can kind of draw a quadrant when you're thinking about a blockchain solution, public-private on one side, open and closed on the other, and start to think about, okay, what are we talking about building? Who's going to add data to the solution? Who's going to consume that data? And this is the heart of what I really wanted to get to. If we talk about something like Bitcoin or Ethereum, the platforms we hear so much about, we could describe them with these attributes. We could say that they provide us a decentralized ledger that can store any kind of data. And that ledger is shared with every participant on the network. That ledger is immutable. Data can't be changed, or it can't be changed easily or practically. We have a very high degree of anonymity. We don't know who the participants are. And because we don't know who the participants are, we make everything fully transparent. Because again, if I don't know who you are, how do I define and enforce permissions? I can't. We have group consensus, which is a fancy way of saying if I transact with someone on one of these public platforms and you're all nodes on the network, all of you individually validate that transaction. And finally, we have smart contracts. This is where we can program in our own logic. This is what makes the blockchain more than just data or record storage. It actually makes it something we can build applications on top of. Well, if we look at all these properties of public permissionless blockchains like Bitcoin that we keep hearing so much about, and we ask ourselves, is this a good or bad thing for business? We might come up with the following answers, right? So we have a decentralized ledger that can store any type of data. Is that a good thing for a business solution? Absolutely, absolutely. This ledger gets shared completely and totally with all the participants on the network. Is that good for business? Probably not. I don't know about your organizations, but I know all of the companies I've been a part of, we really wanted to control who got to see certain pieces of our information and under what conditions. If I've negotiated a low price with one supplier, I don't want my other supplier to know that. I want to protect that. We have an immutable ledger. Once we commit a record to the ledger, it's permanent. Is that good for business? Absolutely. Unless you're Enron, or MCI WorldCom, or Lehman Brothers, or some of these other big names that we used to know that aren't around anymore because they took advantage of the mutability of their ledger. How about anonymity and full transparency? Are those good things in a business solution? Those are probably the two worst things you can have in any business solution imaginable. I don't want all of my participants to be anonymous, and I don't want to share everything with them. I want to know who they are so I can control access, and I can control what they see under what circumstances. I don't need group consensus. I don't need every single participant on the network to validate a transaction, because if I have identity, if I know who all the participants are, something really interesting happens. I'm going to keep picking on Ahmed. Let's say Ahmed and I transact together. We have a business relationship. Well, if Ahmed and I have a transaction and we both agree on the outcome, we don't need any of you to validate it. You can just take our word for it. We are the two participants in our business transaction. If we both agree on the outcome, we don't need any other help validating it. This is a significant difference between public and private platforms, or consumer and business platforms in blockchain. And finally, smart contracts, the ability to create our own code, to build our own applications on top of blockchain, well, that's certainly desirable. So the story about blockchain for the enterprise or for business is about how do we keep all of these green items and address the items in red. And that's exactly what platforms like Hyperledger set out to do. Now, in the closing minutes, I'll just leave you with one thought. Has anyone ever heard of the traveling salesman problem before? A couple brave hands. One way there in the back, her hand went up right away. She knows this one. The traveling salesman problem, for those of you who aren't familiar, is a very simple problem. It says you're a salesperson, and you're going on a business trip, and you have customers in different cities, and you have to visit each customer once and only once. What is the most efficient or shortest route that you can take to visit all of your customers? And this is an example of what's known as an NP, or a non-polynomial problem. In mathematics and computational theory, these are the most difficult kind of problems to solve, because NP problems are the ones that require exponentially more computing power as you linearly increase the data set. Let me explain what I mean. So if you're just in one city and your customer is in the same city, you have no problem. You don't have to go anywhere. If you have two customers in two different cities, you still don't have a problem. Because it doesn't matter if you go city A to B or B to A, you're still covering the same distance. In fact, if you have 3 customers in 3 different cities, you still have no problem. You're going to draw the same triangle no matter which way you go. But when you get to 4 or more, it gets tougher to find the quickest route. And calculating the most efficient route for 5 cities takes exponentially more computing power than calculating that same route for 4. And 6 takes exponentially more than 5. That's why you can go to Google Maps and you can tell Google Maps, hey, I want to see Riyadh, Jeddah, Dubai, and Baghdad. And it will tell you the most efficient route to visit those cities in that order. But you can't go to Google Maps and say, these are the 4 cities I want to see. I don't care what order. Just find me the most efficient route. Even Google doesn't have enough computing power to answer that question for you. Why do I bring all this up? Because our modern business networks resemble this traveling salesman problem. If you're company A, up here at the top, and you decide you want to integrate with the bank, well, that's pretty simple. You just integrate your systems to the bank systems. Now the auditor steps in. And so the auditor has to connect their systems to the systems of the bank and to your company. Things have gotten a little bit more complex. Then we get the lawyers and attorneys involved. Now the attorneys have to integrate with the auditors and the banks back to the attorney, and I have to integrate with the attorneys, starting to get more complex. Now another company steps in, a vendor, a supplier, a partner. Now I've got to integrate with that supplier. The supplier has to integrate back to the attorneys and to the bank and to the auditors. And you can see how this spaghetti in the middle starts to get more complex. The net result of this is that we are artificially limiting the size of our business networks because we don't have a good way to deal with this increasing complexity. There's certain industries where this is particularly painful. If you talk to anyone in pharmaceutical research or drug discovery, people working to find cures for our most pressing diseases, they will talk about this problem. They will tell you that we could find treatments for the most severe diseases and ailments out there if only we could form bigger networks, if only we could collaborate with more universities and independent researchers and think tanks and charitable organizations and other pharmaceutical companies. If only we could collaborate with a bigger group, but we can't because managing this infrastructure, the complexity of it, is simply overwhelming. What platforms like Hyperledger aim to do, what blockchain for business is all about, is, hey, let's create a common infrastructure that exists between our organizations, truly shared infrastructure between us, that not one single entity owns or controls or has full access to. That way we can scale up or down the size of this business network at will, and we don't have to worry about it. If a new participant comes in, they just have to integrate to the blockchain, and that takes care of everything. By the way, about every 10 years or so, we try and solve this exact same problem. Blockchain is just the latest iteration of a solution. About 10 years ago, we talked about something called services-oriented architecture that was supposed to address this for us. It didn't. Blockchain may be the answer to this. We may look back in 10 years and realize that it didn't do much to address the issue. But that's the promise and the hope, and we're already starting to see some very exciting use cases come out which are proving the value of all this. So, in closing, how do you know if you've got a good blockchain solution at your company or your enterprise? Well, these are some of the symptoms of a good blockchain use case. And just like in medicine, displaying the symptoms does not necessarily mean you have the disease. It just means if I'm a doctor and you come in and you're displaying symptoms, there's a good chance that's the disease you have, and I should at least test you for that. Well, if you have problems in your enterprise which display these symptoms, there's a very good chance you have a blockchain use case, or you should at least be thinking about how blockchain can be used in your organization. So, do you have a problem that doesn't just exist in your company, but it's a problem with a large business network or consortium? How do I integrate with suppliers, vendors, partners, auditors, attorneys, accountants, government officials, etc.? Do you have a problem where every participant in that network wants to maintain ownership and control of their data? A lot of times when you're talking about a blockchain solution, someone in IT and engineering mind will go, well, hey, technically, we could do all this with a database. If you ask that, okay, if we could do all this with a database, why haven't we? Very often, the answer that you get to that question is a human problem. Yes, we could do it all with a database, but databases have administrators and owners. And I don't want to put my data into your database that you own and you control and you make all the decisions about. Wouldn't it be great if we had some kind of shared infrastructure? Blockchain can fit into that. You have many different audience types, all of which who are going to want to see different parts of the data. My banker is going to want to see different data than the auditor from the government who's overseeing my business. This can be tough to do in a database world. Usually what we do is put all the data in one place and then put an extensive permissioning layer on top of it to create these different views for our audiences. There's an easier way to do that with blockchain. Because blockchain is workflow or process automation, it's a great way to standardize and automate processes. Do you have a lot of business processes which require you to go back and prove that you actually did what you said you were going to do, or prove that you're in the process of doing what you promised you're going to do? Blockchain could be a good fit for that. Do you need a record of how your data evolves over time? Databases are good at showing us a snapshot or a point in time. But do you want to see that history and how your data evolves? Blockchain could be a good fit. And then especially with these large business networks, maybe I just need one official source of truth for all these organizations in my business network. What I mean by that is, if I ask you a question about an employee at your company, your internal HR system can be the voice of truth. If I ask you about inventory levels at your factory, your ERP system can be the voice of the truth. But what's difficult is, what if I ask, what is the source of truth for a question about a business process that touches all of our organizations at some point? If I'm a manufacturer and you're all suppliers, what is the source of truth between us? Is it my internal system or yours? Neither one is a really good answer. So maybe we need this system of record or source of truth on this large business network. And that's it. I'm going to go ahead and be quiet now. We have an awesome panel discussion coming up after this that I'm really looking forward to. But hopefully this has given you a little bit of insight into the difference between the platforms we hear so much about, platforms like Ethereum and Bitcoin, and platforms we're not hearing a lot about, and some of the potential that blockchain has to really revolutionize and transform the business world. And I think I've used up all my time, so I don't think we have any questions. But like I said, we'll be doing a discussion panel after this, so thank you. Thank you very much for having me here. This has absolutely been a pleasure. Shukran lak.
Can we go in the middle a little bit?
Thank you very much, Mr. Bennett. We are very thankful and would like to honor Mr. Bennett for such a wonderful and amazing presentation. Thank you very much.